2020 COVID clinical care rounds focused on EMS patient care and operations. I'm John Kramer. I'm an emergency physician and EMS physician, the director of the Office of EMS of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and the team lead for the Health and Human Services Healthcare Resiliency Working Group, EMS pre-hospital team. I'm also the EMS medical director for the Caroline County, Maryland Department of Emergency Services. The purpose of these sessions is peer-to-peer real-time sharing of COVID EMS challenges and successes. In developing these sessions, our guiding principle is if I'm preparing my EMS system for COVID-19 patients, the clinicians I want to learn from are those who have the most experience. This is a voluntary public-private collaboration. Thanks to the multiple professional organizations who have collaborated in this series. It is not intended to be redundant or replace any organization's initiatives. It is intended to be sharing of clinical experiences, not recommendations or guidance. These ECHO clinical rounds you are now participating in are focused on healthcare providers sharing their successes and challenges with other healthcare providers. Particular thanks to Project ECHO, Dr. Bruce Struminger, Amanda Dazan, Amy Armistead, and their team for the peer-to-peer learning platform we're using for these rounds. Upcoming ECHO COVID-19 clinical rounds currently are typically all noon Eastern time. Tuesday's rounds focus on critical care. Thursday's rounds focus on emergency departments. And we're adding a new session today that Bruce will talk more about in just a minute on outpatient therapeutics. It's self-evident that our nation's medical response challenges are changing every day. We'll continue to work to identify topics for these peer-to-peer learning rounds that are most timely and useful to clinicians. For the ECHO clinical rounds, we continue to have participants from many states, multiple countries, primarily physicians, nurses, and EMS clinicians. Appreciation to NETEC, the National Emerging Special Pathogen Training and Education Center, for their support with these rounds. These ECHO clinical rounds and NETEC's webinars are complementary to each other. We continue to receive many questions for each of these rounds, many of which you have submitted for this round that we will be addressing today. We apologize in advance that we're not going to be able to answer all of them. We will continue to do our crowdsourcing and polling questions with results shown in real time so that we have an opportunity all to see those results together. I'd like to now turn it over to Dr. Struminger for some additional logistics information. Bruce?
Thank you, John, and welcome to our guest presenters today, to our expert panelists, and in particular to the over 250 participants from across the country taking time out to join us today. Just going to review a few logistic items, as John mentioned. We really appreciate your questions and comments. Please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, and we'll be looking there to try and answer as many of your questions and respond to comments as we can. If you have any technical or logistic issues, please put those in the chat feature, also along the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. We are recording today's session, and your attendance is consent to be recorded. Thank you for that. A link to the recording will be available within a couple of days on our HHS ASPR Clinical Rounds website. We'll share a link to that site in the chat, and you should be able to find that in the announcement that went out today as well. And the recordings of all the prior 90+ clinical round sessions and all the PowerPoints are there for anyone who wants to find them. Also, we're offering CME and continuing professional development credits through the University of New Mexico, where Project Echo is based. There should be a link in today's announcement to the CME survey, and you'll be able to get instant electronic CME. We'll also share a link in the chat about 15 minutes before the end of today's session. Just as a reminder, these are learning sessions focused on improving patient care and health systems and supporting clinicians. We just want to remind everyone to keep them apolitical and non-commercial. Thank you for that. Also, a word about data use. You share a variety of data with us when you register, when you answer the polling questions, in the Q&A. We just want to remind everyone we take data stewardship very seriously. All the data we share with HHS ASPR is de-identified. Most of it is de-identified up front, but what is identified, we de-identify it before sharing it. As John mentioned, NETEC, the National Emerging Special Pathogen Training and Education Center, is a partner in these clinical rounds. They've been supporting their own series of webinars, which has been fantastic. In many respects, they get ideas from these clinical rounds and questions that come up. They have a wonderful archive of their prior sessions. They're preparing new sessions, and we just encourage you to go to their website to see what's coming up. At present, they don't have any scheduled for the next week or so, but they're usually scheduling them almost every week. As John mentioned, there will be a new mini series focused on outpatient therapeutics starting this Wednesday at noon Eastern. And we anticipate 5 or 6 or so sessions over the next 1.5 months. These will initially focus on monoclonal antibodies, but may expand to include polyclonal antibodies and other outpatient therapeutics that might become available in the near future. We'll be sending announcements out for these, and everyone who registers for this series should receive them. Also, the AAMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, is a partner in these clinical rounds. They have a wonderful clinical guidance repository, which they're updating every week. And we encourage you to go to that site to take advantage of the terrific curated resources they've got. With that, John, I'll hand it back to you for the crowdsourcing question of the day.
Thanks, Bruce. So for your responses over the course of the rest of the session, this is actually a two-part question, so bear with us, but we've talked on multiple sessions in the past about our concerns with increasing complacency among EMS clinicians. And that is acknowledging a fact that has been stated. That's not suggesting any type of value judgment associated with that. So as you're looking at this issue, with what aspect of the response are we becoming most complacent? And what can we all do collectively to address that issue or these issues? When you're responding, please indicate if you're outside the United States, the country from which you're responding. If you're in the United States, just please indicate the state so that we can get sort of a general idea of the geographic areas. We have our wonderful panel of panelists who are joining us today. We'll introduce each of them as we get a little bit more into the panel discussion. But it's now my pleasure to introduce our two presenters today. Dr. Ken Schepke is board certified in both emergency medicine and EMS. He's been a practicing emergency physician and EMS physician for over 25 years and serves as a state EMS medical director for the Florida Department of Health. He's also the EMS medical director for 6 fire rescue agencies, in Palm Beach County, Florida. He's been intimately involved in leading the state's COVID-19 response since the beginning of the pandemic. Dr. Shepke received his bachelor's in biochemistry from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, his MD also from State University Stony Brook School of Medicine, and completed his residency at the Emergency Medicine Medical Center of Delaware, where he served as a chief resident. Matt Zvazky is the Chief Strategic Integration Officer for MedStar Mobile Healthcare in Fort Worth. He has helped transform MedStar as an integral part of Fort Worth's regional healthcare delivery system. MedStar has recently been participating in COVID testing and is working with a number of healthcare systems and state and regional partners for COVID vaccine administration, monoclonal antibody infusions, and post-discharge follow-up care for COVID positive patients. Matt's also the president of the National Association of EMTs and has been working with NAEMT and other EMS associations to expand the role of EMS in healthcare systems, especially during the current public health emergency. Matt and Ken, welcome and thank you so much for participating today. Kenneth, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share your slides and lead us into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. So I'm going to go over some of the vaccines in the pipeline in the United States, and I think I even saw it in the chat. There's some hesitancy with some of our, at least fire rescue and EMS providers with the vaccine. I think this presentation may help with some of that. I think one of the things is people are worried how fast we got here. So just a little background, vaccination officially started in 1796 with Edward Jenner when he realized that the vaccinia virus, which is cowpox, could prevent smallpox. In fact, that's where the word vaccination came from. And there's been a number of advances in technology in vaccination since then. And there are a lot of different types of vaccinations. You can use a killed virus like we do in hepatitis A. You can use a live but weakened virus like we have in measles. You can take a benign virus and genetically manipulate it to make the protein that you want. And that's what AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson's COVID candidates are doing. You can use a piece of a virus like Novavax is doing. And then what I really want to concentrate on, which will be the first two to come out in the United States, is this messenger RNA technology. This is not even a virus. This is a virus-like lipid nanoparticle. So how did we get here so fast? I think that's one of the main questions that we need to show people the data so they can be a little more comfortable with this process. So it took us literally as humans thousands of years to get our first vaccine with smallpox, and then it took hundreds of years to get the next advance. The measles, to create a weakened measles virus that we could use for a vaccine took over a decade. And the Human Genome Project, which I'm going to mention, and it doesn't sound like it should be related, but it's really key as to why we can do things so quickly now. So the Human Genome Project, for those of you who remember, it took $3 billion, over 200 labs in the United States, 18 other countries collaborated on it, and took 13 years to decode the human genome. Today, we can do the exact same thing in 24 hours for less than $1,000. That is the state of technology, and that's one of the reasons why we can move so quickly now. And it has to do with the comparative size of genetic databases. Human has 6 billion bases in our DNA. A fruit fly, as a comparison, 123 million bases. The bacteria like E. coli, only 5 million bases. And the virus that causes COVID-19, only 30,000 bases. So as you can see, that's not even a drop in the bucket of the amount of data you'd have to decode compared to a human. So as you imagine, we can get that data pretty quickly. So messenger RNA vaccines are not a virus. What they are is basically a recipe. Messenger RNA is nuclear material that is a recipe to create a protein. And it can be any target protein. In this case, we're using it for the spike protein, which I'll get into in a moment. But this is used in other technology, and it's newer technology. I don't want to say it's brand new. Work on this started maybe 30 years ago, but really heated up in the last 10 to 15 years, and very much so in the last 5 years. And you can make a protein for any protein you want. And in fact, they're using this not just for infectious diseases, but for cancer as well. As if you have a tumor or cancer in your body, you often start getting a mutated protein. A protein that does not normally exist in your body will start to appear on these cancer cells. Well, if you get the genetic recipe or messenger RNA for that particular protein, you could put it into one of these lipid nanoparticles, which is just Lipid nanoparticle is just a fancy medical word for a little ball of fat. Put the messenger RNA in that, inject it, and you can teach your body to make antibodies against that mutated protein. In fact, they're doing that with melanoma, and that teaches the body's immune system to start killing any cells, cancer cells in this case, that have that mutated protein. In the world of vaccines, though, you want to do it to whatever you want to make the antibody to. In this case, it's the spike protein of the COVID virus, and that is the protein that attaches to our cells. So if you can cover up that particular protein, then you basically take away the virus's ability to attach to our cells. But the important thing of that, and that if there is a silver lining in this pandemic, is that this technology is ultra rapid. So it doesn't take thousands of years, doesn't take hundreds of years, doesn't take 10 years. It literally took us 63 days from deciphering the genetic code of the SARS-CoV-2 virus to the first human being vaccinated, getting an injection with the vaccine. So then the question is, all right, so we had the 63 days way back months and months ago. Why is it so long now that we're still not seeing, we still don't have the vaccine? And the reason for that is the safety and testing that needs to go into it. So when you run a study, you have two groups, right? You have your test subjects that get the vaccine, in this case, the messenger RNA vaccine, and you have your placebo group. And what we do is we then, after they've been injected, you got to wait for these folks to go about their lives, and a certain number of them are going to get infected. Now, normally it takes a long time because you don't have the disease is not so prevalent. Like if you think about Zika or Ebola, the whole world wasn't covered in that. But when you've got a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, when literally hundreds of thousands of people are coming down with this disease every single day, your study population gets exposed to the disease rapidly, and then you start to get that statistical number of infections that you can tell the difference between those who got the vaccine and who has got the placebo. And that's basically how you tell the difference. You look and see, all right, of the folks in our study that got the vaccine, what percentage were vaccinated? I mean, of the folks that got the disease, what percentage were vaccinated and what got the placebo? And that ratio gives you the efficacy. So Pfizer and BioNTech, they'll probably be the first one to come out. The messenger RNA vaccine. Ultra cold storage is one of the issues with this one. You've all heard probably about the cold chain. If you want to store it long term, you've got to be at negative 80 degrees centigrade. This is not a normal freezer. This is a special medical freezer. But you can put it in a regular refrigerator for 5 days. So as long as you're going to use this rapidly, a regular refrigerator will work for a short time. Once you take it up with the room temperature, 6 hours. The reason for these short time frames at normal temperatures is because the messenger RNA is a very fragile molecule. Now, they had a pretty big study, 44,000 folks, diverse background, importantly, 0 safety concerns, and real importantly, 95% effective. And it gave us both antibodies and T-cell immunity, which I'll talk about in a moment. And it looks like we'll be able to get a bunch of doses from those folks before the end of this year. And it's going to be shipped in these dry ice boxes to keep it cold. And that leads us to Moderna, which is the next vaccine that's going to be coming out after Pfizer. Also a messenger RNA, very, very similar technology, a little more stable. You could put this one in a regular freezer, just like the one you have in your kitchen, for up to 6 months. And you could put it in a regular refrigerator for up to 30 days. Actually, the FDA did come out and agree to the 30-day thing. So regular refrigerator, that's really going to help us with the distribution. Again, once it's open, you got 6 hours. Also a big study, 30,000, also 0 safety concerns, and this one over 94% effective. Now, let me talk about that efficacy rate, because this is really important. This is grand slam efficacy rate, and the best vaccines in human history, something like measles, is upper 90%. Typical vaccine, something like influenza, ranges from a low of 20 to a high of 60, or about an average of 40. That's 40% efficacy. So to get something that's 95% effective, man, that's knocking it out of the park. That's on par with some of the best vaccines humans have ever created. And the reason why you want both antibody and T-cell immunity is, if you can imagine our military, you got different branches of the military, you got different branches of the immune system. So the antibodies, what they'll do is they'll cover up all those spike proteins. And if you cover up all the spike proteins, now the virus no longer has a way to attach to your cell. That's called neutralizing antibody, because it neutralizes the virus. But you also want to have T-cell immunity. What T-cells do, and there's a bunch of different T-cells, but what one of them does is it recognizes cells that are infected. And the way a virus copies itself is it gets into a cell, infects it, and it basically takes over that cell's protein synthesis machinery. And that's how it copies itself. Well, the T-cells recognize infected cells, kill the cells, thus avoiding the virus' ability to copy itself. So importantly, both of Moderna and Pfizer gave us both arms of our immune system were appropriately armed with that. It does look like vaccine supplies are going to come out with this, which is important. I'm not sure it'll be enough gloves in there, but it does look like they'll have some basic PPE and syringes. I'm going to go through the other three that are closer in the pipeline. AstraZeneca It's a little different technology, a little older. This is a live virus. It's a benign virus that causes it causes a cold in chimpanzees. It cannot replicate itself. They genetically modified it so that this virus, once it gets into your cells, will create that spike protein. Also has antibody and T-cell immune response. They won't be done by the end of this year, but it does look like early 2021 they'll be able to apply for emergency use authorization. Johnson & Johnson, very similar to AstraZeneca, also an adenovirus. The important one with Johnson & Johnson is that this is a single shot series. All of the others I'm going to talk about is 2 shots. Get one today and get another one 3 or 4 weeks later. Johnson & Johnson, they're trying to get it to be a single shot, which hopefully they'll be able to pull that off. That makes logistics a bit easier. Also, won't be ready until early 2021. The Novavax, this is not a protein, rather this is not a virus. This is just a piece of the virus, in this case, the spike protein. When you use just a piece of a virus like a protein, it's usually not as much of a robust immune response. So you do have to combine it with an adjuvant. So that's what they did. Their early results also look good, also antibody and T-cell immunity. They're not quite as far as the others in the pipeline, so expect that a little later into 2021. This last 3 are all can be a normal refrigerator, so it'll make it a little easier. Now, it will probably come to pass that we'll have multiple vaccines out on the market that have EUAs, and like I said, most of them require a 2-shot series. You got to make sure, though, that you get the same shot twice. So if you get the Pfizer first, you got to take the Pfizer second, and so forth. So make sure if you go through this vaccine series, you get the same one both times. Just real briefly on how we can roll this out. Just like we had mass testing sites with EMS helping the staff, that we can do just swap out the nasal swab for these shots. We've actually done this in Palm Beach County, worked really, really well. Just gotta make sure you have a waiting lot where folks can, if you do drive-through or walk-up spots, that they can wait 15 minutes after vaccination, make sure there's no allergic reactions. We can use mobile vaccination teams to go to some of our population that are traditionally difficult accessing healthcare, like our homeless folks. Long-term care facilities, Florida's already ramping up to do this until CVS and Walgreens and the other pharmacies get going. We're going to send our EMS vaccination crews to long-term care facilities. And you can use a rural hub and spoke model. When you've got smaller agencies, what you do is combine, and maybe each one of those agencies can add 1 or 2 folks to a strike team that can go around and create a mobile vaccination team. We can do the same thing for those folks around the country where their nurses are really tied up because of hospitals getting full. Perhaps paramedics can be a force multiplier for the hospital vaccine programs to free up those nurses to do the inpatient care. And for Florida, we do allow paramedics to give vaccinations under law, and that's this. We just have to show that they get trained and their medical directors sign off on it. And I suspect it's probably similar in some of the other states. So I'll turn it back over to you, John. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to present today.
Ken, thank you so much. Unbelievably valuable and a lot of really important information there. Really appreciate your getting that in. Take a breath now. You've got an opportunity to catch your breath. I know that was a lot of stuff, but when Ken and I chatted, he as demonstrated, the information is very, very important. He wanted to make sure that we got it in an appropriate amount of time so that we could still have a panel discussion. I now like to turn it over. Matt, please share with us what you've been doing in the Fort Worth system. Matt, if you're talking, you may still be on mute.
You know, however long we've been doing this Zoom stuff, sometimes you still forget that you got to unmute yourself. So thank you, John, for allowing me to do that. And thanks, Dr. Kramer and the team for the invitation. I will probably not be able to speak as quickly as Ken did, but we'll try to move pretty quickly as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the operationalization, if you will, of the coronavirus vaccine, what our experience has been so far, and some of the economic models, and then briefly on the work that's been done so far, at least the investigation into the monoclonal antibody activity as well. So when it comes to the coronavirus vaccines and even some of the antibody infusions that we'll be talking about here in a second, EMS is a logical partner. As you heard Dr. Schepke talk about, we are a trusted resource, mobile resource. We have the capability to be very nimble. So we've heard it referenced many times that EMS is sort of the Swiss Army knife of the healthcare system, and this is really no different. So, however, there are a couple of things to keep in mind when you're moving into these new roles. First, you got to make sure that your medical direction is bought in fully. Hopefully your relationship in your agencies with your medical director is as great as it is with ours and with Palm Beach County and a number of folks, but having that close relationship with your medical director so that you have the opportunity for their approval to do some of these things. They might need to be involved in training, authorizing different receipt of materials, etc. Has been really important for you guys. Has been very beneficial for us. Our medical director, Dr. Vithalani, has been very supportive of these types of programs. And also make sure that you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's when it comes to the local and state regulatory hurdles that you may have to overcome. Now, thankfully, many of the state EMS directors and others have been very flexible with changing some of the rules, doing some waivers because of the public health emergency. But again, if you're going to look at doing the vaccines and doing some of the antibody infusions, making sure that you're working closely with those two organizations and those two bodies is very, very important. Also, public health. This is a public health emergency. And if you have not, if you're a provider, if you have not yet begun having close conversations with your local or state public health authorities, you are hereby excused from this webinar, and you may go do so now, because if you haven't done it yet, it's probably a little bit late, but you're going to find, like we did and like others have, very willing partners, because they are facing a monumental challenge of getting coronavirus vaccines and even now doing the antibody infusions that are going to require that Swiss Army knife of a trusted provider in the local community, going out into the community, doing some of those very, very important roles to help try and get a handle on this particular virus. Now, obviously, the process to apply for, get approval for, to do these vaccines, when you were doing it with flu vaccines and things, it was relatively easy, because essentially it's your medical director approving it, working with your local health authority to make sure that you're able to track who's getting the vaccines and who's ordering and how much you've gotten. However, this is a whole new level now when you're doing the coronavirus vaccine. So our folks here, Mike Potts is our risk and safety manager. He's been doing a phenomenal job navigating the CDC guidance, getting the applications done. You do need to contract with the CDC to be a site to be able to do the coronavirus vaccines. There are some requirements that you register to be able to track the vaccines that you receive, how you've been caring for those, and who you're going to vaccinate, because again, as Dr. Shepke mentioned, there are multiple doses in most of these vaccines. So being able to track who's it being administered to, who's it being administered by, are they coming back for their second injection? All of those are very important. CDC has some great resources that you will be required to do as you go through that process. You also have to make sure that you've got the refrigerators. You heard some of the environmental controls that are necessary. We've had to go through, thankfully, we partnered with our county government. The county is actually purchasing the refrigerators and the freezers for us, but you also have to have tracking systems to track the temperature and be able to have digital loggers to constantly record that. So make sure that you've made allowances for that in your CDC contracting, because you're going to have to provide that. One of the things I should have mentioned, Dr. Kramer and others, is we're going to provide a summary to Dr. Kramer and his team of all these different steps that you need to go through as part of that process that will help. The good news is also that Medicare has made allowances for ambulance providers to be able to be reimbursed for coronavirus vaccines. It's a little bit of a process you have to go through to get registered as a type 73 mass immunizer. However, your local Medicare, your local MAC will make that very easy for you. All of them have hotlines, and you can literally call, register. If you're already a Medicare provider, that's the key, then you can register to become a type 73 mass immunizer. Typically, you get approval within 24 hours. It is a temporary approval for the duration of the public health emergency, like pretty much all the waivers have been so far. However, you can continue that once the PHE is over, as long as you meet some of the requirements that CMS is going to put in place. And again, we'll provide the team with the resources that you can go to start doing that registration process. So there's been a lot of discussion about how will EMS and be reimbursed for these types of programs. That is part of the way that you can do it. Most of the payers have agreed to do the same thing that Medicare is doing. And oh, by the way, remember the HRSA uninsured funding pool for treating coronavirus patients. These activities qualify for that as well. So you can actually bill for the uninsured patients that you're going to be providing vaccines for to that program that you're doing for your regular ambulance work and can be reimbursed for the uninsured patients. Moving quickly into the monoclonal antibodies activities. So we were approached by one of our large, actually two of our large public hospital system here, and then a second hospital system. When this was first authorized through the CDC for the emergency use authorization, these monoclonal antibodies typically need to be infused in the outpatient setting. And a lot of hospitals don't have perhaps a robust outpatient setting. So they came to us and said, hey, can you be part of this solution? Either doing it in the patient's home, perhaps we've discussed now using our AMBUS for that, or being part of a regional approach, which is really where looks like we're leaning now, where multiple hospital systems will get together, EMS will get together, other partners, and share resources to provide some regional infusion centers like they've done in El Paso, that type of thing. However, I will share with you that this process is also a little bit evolving as we go. These patients typically are going to be a 3-hour patient encounter. Remember that in this particular case, you're going to have about a half an hour set up. The infusion occurs over about 60 minutes. Then the patient has to be monitored for another 60 minutes to see if there were any adverse reactions to the infusion, and then the wrap up. So for us, it seemed to make more sense to either use the AMBUS, where you can schedule 3, 4, 5 patients at a time as sort of an infusion clinic, and use a community paramedic, mobile integrated healthcare paramedic, critical care paramedic with one other person for support to be able to begin to monitor those patients and make it more economically feasible. Same thing applies here. Make sure that your medical director is fully on board. This is, in fact, a little bit more outside the box than even doing vaccines. Although paramedics and community paramedics and critical care paramedics may have this ability to do infusions, make sure the training is in place, make sure your medical director is comfortable with it, make sure it meets the scope of practice guidelines, either as modified by your local or state EMS authorities, to make sure that, again, this is something that they are consistent with. The good news here also is that these programs are also billable, and you can receive Medicare reimbursement for these services using the exact same process that they've put in place for the coronavirus vaccine. So now the thing I should have said about the vaccine and about the antibody infusions, in many cases in the beginning during the public health emergency, the materials are going to be provided by the federal government. So you can't bill for the materials, but you can only bill for the actual administration, the personnel time, any supplies that you may use. So you do have that capability. And the information that we give to Dr. Kramer, you'll see how you can go through the process to register for that as well. I'll just close in summary that, you know, we would strongly encourage, if you haven't done it yet, again, talk to your public health partners, but EMS is a logical partner for these programs because of our local trust and our ability to be nimble and do some of these things to help with the public health emergency. And with that, Dr. Kramer, I will close and turn the floor back over to you for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Matt. And without discussing ahead of time the particular areas for each of you to cover, you both nailed it, and thank you for that. Very, very important information on both sides and very complementary to each other. I will, panelists, start to get ready to chime in. And when you do, either raise your hand figuratively or literally, and we'll go around that way. Then please introduce yourselves. There are two things that I will pick up on as we're transitioning into that. Matt, thank you for covering the reimbursement considerations, because those are extremely important. There was a question that had to do with liability coverage. As Dr. Kupas mentioned, some of that varies a little bit state to state, but they should also be covered by the Federal PrEP Act, which does provide immunity for folks involved in these types of activities. Again, talk with your state or agency counsel just to confirm that, but the PrEP Act should cover that. Another question that came up had to do with starting to educate the public on potential side effects associated with these vaccinations. And I think that's an excellent point, particularly in view of the new technology with these vaccinations, with these vaccines. They are not viral particles. So getting the vaccine will not cause one to get COVID-19, a COVID-19 infection. So yeah, we need to be very deliberate about making sure that folks in the community understand that. Ken, any follow-up comments to Matt's discussion points, and then we'll go around to the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, absolutely. First, fantastic presentation. And I think, at least in Florida, EMS has really been at the vanguard for this response, because we do so many different things and are very comfortable going to areas. If I have a moment, John, I do want to answer that post-vaccination symptom issue, because it's a very important point. So it's much more common after the second shot for these messenger RNAs vaccines, and it's the symptoms tend to be common to other vaccines. You might get a little redness at the site, a little achy, maybe you could even have a low-grade fever. But the important thing is it goes away, it's self-limited, 24, 48 hours, usually Tylenol helps with it, and it's not dangerous. But it's from a practical and operational standpoint, you don't want your entire hospital staff or EMS or fire rescue staff vaccinated at the exact same time, because we are all screening for COVID symptoms, and those symptoms I just rattled off can be confused with COVID symptoms. So I think staggering, in the case of folks that are doing on 1 and off 48, maybe you do it while they're on duty just before they leave, so they're off for the next couple of days. Maybe we consider, and I don't know yet, there's some of the things we're tossing around about using these rapid antigen tests for folks that get those symptoms right after vaccination. Anyway, I think it's something for us to think about. I don't have an exact answer for you, but the symptoms are far more common after the second shot, a little more common with the Moderna than the Pfizer product, but that's just a sign of your immune system kicking in. It's nothing to be fearful.
Thanks, Ken. Carol.
I have a question for Ken. As you get ready to roll this out in your state, the vaccinations that require the deep freeze, in terms of getting it out to the rural communities, are you, in critical access hospitals, are you using a pre-registration system? Because when you think about the cost of, transporting in a refrigerated truck and some of the misinformation out there, I would hate to see us spending a lot of money getting it out there only to have the people who are eligible decline the vaccination.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've tackled that in a few different ways. The Department of Health has pre-positioned a number of these ultra cold freezers around the state to use as sort of hub and spoke for distributions. You can use the box that Pfizer sends you with the dry ice. You can keep filling that out if you want to keep shipping that around the state, but you just have to keep refilling it with dry ice. We have a number of hospitals that have the ultra cold capabilities that can act as additional depot spots. And we'll be using a number of refrigeration trucks and even EMS that have refrigerators on them. Remember, you don't need to keep it at negative 80 degrees centigrade the whole time. That's for long-term storage. Once you know that you've got a supply that you can use up within 5 days, you can put it in a regular refrigerator. So once we get to some of these smaller critical access hospitals, we just want them to pre-register the folks so they know how many people are going to want the vaccine, because it's not mandatory and not everybody's going to get it. So we want to know how many vaccine vials do you need, and then we will ship that, and that can be, you just need to make sure you use that within 5 days if you don't have the ultra cold.
Thank you.
Other panelists. Rob.
Hi, Rob McClintock. I'm Deputy Director of Fire and EMS Operations with the International Association of Firefighters. Dr. Shepke, I have a quick question for you. I think it's also in the Q&A as well. But if someone was previously infected with COVID-19, should they get the vaccine, and what vaccine would be the best one for them to get?
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes up a lot. And I think ACIP may have come out with that. That's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. We know that natural COVID infection will give you immunity at least for a short period of time. But after that, at least there have been some cases of folks being reinfected. Not sure exactly how often that happens. It seems like it's relatively small, but we know that the first 90 days you're probably protected. So if you're within that 90-day windows after a natural infection, the recommendation is while the vaccine supplies are in short supply, you're probably protected, so let someone else take it. But if you've had COVID in the past, that is not a contraindication to getting the vaccine. So those are the two recommendations coming out of CDC.
Thanks, Ken. And a follow-up question that just appeared in the chat as well. Do we know yet how long after the first or second shot an individual then ends up being effectively protected from the virus?
Yeah, you start getting some protective antibodies after the first shot. The immune system typically kicks in the 7 to 14-day range. That doesn't mean that you've got the high level of neutralizing antibodies. When they measure the efficacy, they're measuring it about a week after the second shot, and that's when you're really seeing that gold star standard where you've got lots of neutralizing antibodies and 95% efficacy. But a little word on this. That is because the data is still not completely in. There's still a number of questions that the studies are ongoing and are going to answer for us. That's 95% efficacious in terms of giving you symptomatic infection. We are still studying whether you can get asymptomatic infection, and while clinically it's irrelevant to you because it's asymptomatic, it's harmless to you, but is it still as high efficacious in terms of creating an environment where even if you have an asymptomatic infection, you cannot be contagious to anybody else? And that data is forthcoming. We just don't have it yet.
Do we have a good handle yet on how long that immunity may last, and if this will end up being a yearly vaccination?
And that's until some time has passed, no one will be able to answer that question for sure for you. So all you get is a bunch of expert opinions on this. So I can give you an opinion, but that's, we don't know for a fact. We do believe that it's going to at least be, a couple of years. At least we're hoping that. When you look at coronaviruses, they're famous for having transient immunity, at least the benign coronaviruses. But the more severe coronaviruses, like SARS-1, those folks, a decade afterwards, more than a decade afterwards, they still had T-cell immunity. So this is now SARS-2 because it's so similar to SARS-1. So I'm hoping that the vaccine will give you something a little more akin to what natural infection did with SARS-1, and it'll be a little longer. But the answer is we don't really know. Time will have to pass before we can tell that. Thank
you. And just to clarify, particularly with the two vaccines that are going to be coming out soon, the Pfizer and the Moderna, the plan is that the first and second shot should be spaced out between 3 and 4 weeks apart. We'll go next to Dan and then to Michael Levy. Daniel?
Yes, Doctor, thank you. Excellent presentation. Just a goofy sort of question. Is there any special handling requirements at the time of injection that would make, either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, some type of imperative that we needed to do just-in-time training for? Or is it like any other flu vaccine? And I'm just talking about for the vaccinator. Obviously, on the back end, the storage, et cetera, I understand that.
That's a great question. There's a couple of quirks. They are both going to be multi-use vials, meaning the vial is going to come. It's going to have 5. One vial for Pfizer will treat 5 people, and one vial for Moderna will treat 10 people. The Pfizer one, that's the one that needs the ultra cold, will come as a frozen product. Well, they're both going to be frozen, but the Pfizer one will need to be mixed with saline just before you give it. So that is a little added step there that we'll need to teach our folks on how to sterilely mix the saline in there. But other than that, it's very, once you've got the product prepared, other than it's multi-dose, you have to have good aseptic technique because you're going to draw out of that vial multiple times. It's pretty standard, like we've done with flu drives and other things that EMS has been involved with.
Great, thank you, sir.
You're muted there, John, but I'm going to take the stage and say maybe you said Mike there. But hey, I want to thank Ken and Matt for great presentations. I have stacked 2 questions in here for you, Ken, kind of question statement. One, do you think we ought to be very circumspect in our use of the word side effect versus complication? It seems to me that the side effect of stimulating the cytokines and getting a febrile response and an achy muscle and stuff, we should have people do backflips over that and say, this is a fantastic thing because, we're off to the races. Things are good. Don't take Tylenol, get a little fever, let it go. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of angst, even among healthcare providers, that hey, we've got here so fast when all other vaccines in human history have taken a long time, that therefore we must have cut corners. And that's what my presentation was trying to allay those fears. It's really improvement in science. So I'm sort of cognizant about talking about safety concerns, zero safety concerns with these two things. Side effects, yeah, lots of vaccines give you side effects because it's turning on your immune system, and your immune system gives you some side effects, you know, little aching, you know, that sort of thing.
Second question, Ken. It seems to me that when things seem too good to be true, sometimes they are too good to be true. So the 95%, again, this is something I think I heard Dr. Offit talking about, but the people that got the vaccine were people that are not mainstream insofar as they are people that probably already sequestered themselves. They were probably a selected group of people that allowed themselves to get the vaccine in the first place. I wonder when we move this out to the wild type, and in addition, start giving it to elderly, debilitated people in nursing homes who have a higher chance day in, day out of dying from other things, whether that's going to skew the results and whether people will make hay on that, the people that want to be deniers on this.
And those are both great points. They did have a very diverse population in both the Moderna and the Pfizer studies. But while 74,000 people sounds like a lot, it's nothing compared to 300 and something million people, right? So there may be super rare things that may become more prevalent as time goes on. But as far as phase 3 clinical trials go, I suspect the FDA is going to look at that and do what some of the other countries around the world and give it a thumbs up that this appears to be both efficacious and safe.
Thank you. I want to shift gears here just a second. We've been talking a lot about the vaccine considerations and critically important, but Matt, as you've started your planning activities with the healthcare systems in relationship to the monoclonal antibody infusions, have there been discussions about patient acceptability and those types of considerations?
There always is, right? Because patient consent is a big deal, but also the willingness for them to accept the treatment. I think we've got this window of opportunity for these types of treatments where patients want to get it because all you got to do is turn on the news and, oh my gosh, this is like the most horrible thing ever. So we've heard from our healthcare partners and others that the resistance of the patients to the infusion treatment has not been very significant at all. In fact, our mayor here in Fort Worth contracted the coronavirus. She was symptomatic. She received the monoclonal antibodies and was miraculously healed, and she's told everybody that. Others have as well. So there has not been a huge concern on the part of the patient adoption for this treatment, especially when it's outpatient. A lot of people don't want to be in the hospital for this treatment for a lot of the media hype that you've heard about what happens to patients when they're in the hospital. So the fact that they can get it on an outpatient basis, perhaps even in their home or at a trusted community partner's location, hasn't been an issue.
And for whom is the infusion currently indicated?
So it is indicated for people who are COVID-19 positive and symptomatic. They say typically mildly symptomatic, but typically because the people that are majorly symptomatic are going to be hospitalized, it is recommended for outpatient procedure only. So these are patients whose symptoms can be treated typically at home, but to shorten the length of the symptoms and to really have a definitive treatment, the monoclonal antibody infusion has been proven to be very, very effective for these patients. So the question is how much of the antibody therapy is going to be available? How quickly can we use it to really shorten the symptoms of the folks and to prevent hospitalization, to prevent the symptoms from getting worse to where they need hospitalization?
Thank you. We'll turn to Doug for another question or comment, and then we'll go to the polling questions. Doug?
Yeah, more of a comment, John. I first of all would say that I think Matt, in my opinion, has been spot on with this. My MIH agency that I do medical direction for last week gave about 40 doses of the monoclonal antibody, and it's a heavy lift. There are a lot of issues. We did all of those in skilled nursing facilities because it was easy to batch patients and go in and do anywhere from 3 to 6 at a time. The lift in going into people's homes, which was our initial idea, just takes a lot of effort for a 3+ hour visit, usually by the time you do the whole thing and then travel there. We just started today in doing community sites. And some of the issues that we've run into is that many of the tests are send out tests, and when people are symptomatic and get scheduled and go get a test and send it out, often they're not getting their positive results for 3 to 5 days or more after their initial symptoms, and there is a window on when you can give these for them to be effective. So I think it's a very heavy lift for a place that wants to do it. I would reinforce the idea of doing it with a health system and in a central place or a SNF, rather than trying to do them as one-offs, because they are very energy requiring.
Thank you, Doug. If we can now transition over to the polling questions. As I mentioned, we only have 5 of them today, so we can hopefully get through them relatively quickly and have additional time for comments. But Echo team, if you could pull up the first question, and this is one that you all have seen before. Again, we want to follow this over time. In your EMS agency today, which of the following PPE supplies are you most short of? And we have great response coming in. We'll continue to let it go for just a couple more seconds. All right. We can show the results, please. So we've got not short of PPE, good thing, but we'll again encourage folks to continue to watch that very closely, followed by N95s and then gowns and gloves, which is a little bit of a change because gloves have been a significant issue over the last several weeks. Next question, please. The following questions will have to do specifically with vaccine issues. As of today, COVID-19 vaccine and vaccination plan information shared with EMS field clinicians is more than adequate, adequate, or less than adequate. And folks are jumping on this one very, very quickly. Thank you. We'll go for a couple of seconds here. All right, we've slowed up, so let's show the questions. And I'm hoping that this is overall for the EMS clinician universe. Those of us that have been listening to this webinar, it's got to at least be adequate, if not more than adequate. But this definitely shows us that we have a way to go yet. Next question, please. As of today, I feel confident in receiving the COVID-19 vaccines, which would be available when released by the FDA. Oh, and this one is going up very quickly by a lot more folks. Thank you. We're still climbing. I'll give it another second or two. Okay, very good. Yes, followed by unsure, and half as many folks who are still not convinced and will not be getting it. Very good. Next question, please. As of today, I plan to receive the vaccine, which will be available. This one's getting close to more responses than to the last question. Yes. All right. The results are just shy of 3/4, indicating that they will get it. Thank you. And the final question, please. As of today, my agency will be involved in COVID vaccination administration in my community. Another couple of seconds here. We're almost at 2/3. Yes. All right, let's show the results, please. Just under half yes, just over, or just about a third unsure. So we have some work to do getting some of the EMS agencies involved in these activities. And I understand that it will be unique to your state and your location based on the needs that the system has. All right, thank you. Other questions or comments from panelists? Will.
Hi, everybody. Got off mute there. So, yeah, Will Smith, EMS, emergency medicine physician, live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Have several hats here locally as medical director, but also with National Park Service and Army Reserve hat with the Army EMS program office. So, first, just great presentations by Ken and Matt. I think if I had that kind of presentation in med school, my immunology class would have gone a lot better. But again, dusting off the cobwebs. And I think that's kind of really from what I see as a EMS physician, trying to really get the education out there. And just when we kind of make any of these decisions with patients, whether or not it's COVID vaccine or kind of another newer treatment, is just making sure that we have that shared decision-making, kind of give the risks and benefits as best as we know. There are unknowns out there, and there's going to be that for a period of time. So I think Doug put in the notes that if we made a challenge to all EMS physicians and medical directors to give this to their employees, to their paramedics, to their EMTs, to their first responders, I think that could go a long way. So I thought that was an excellent comment by Doug. So thank you very much for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you. And panelists, I know that Matt has to drop off immediately at the top of the hour. So any quick questions or comments for Matt, and then we'll continue a few minutes for Ken. Mike?
I jumped the gun. I don't have a question for Matt, except when does he sleep?
You're on mute, Matt.
Yeah, I was so tired I couldn't find the mute button. You know, thankfully, all of you keep us on our toes, and we have to not sleep for self-defense and to try and stay ahead of this curve. So thank you all for what you guys are doing in this community and keeping us safe and really pushing this issue. It's really important. Thank you.
Matt, thank you very much. We appreciate your participation today. And as Mike alluded to, everything that you guys are doing down there, both regionally with your system and nationally within EMT. Thank you. Questions or comments? Mike.
I just wanted to briefly touch the tail of the elephant that's in the room, and that is, you know, this huge amount of disinformation that we're all subjected to. And not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but just with our people and the idea of herd immunity, and maybe as leaders in our agencies, we can gently help people understand, you know, kind of what a myth the idea of a wild type herd immunity would be, and how devastating that would be, and that the vaccine, you know, is a necessary part of this next step. If anybody else has comments on that, thanks.
Carol?
I don't know how it's going to roll out, but we're actually thinking about putting out a community service education, kind of a PSA, not one targeted toward EMS providers, so that they know that vaccination is the best way to maintain our workforce and not wait till you get sick and get monoclonal antibodies. I think the same kind of message needs to go to the community, but with a different spin. We in healthcare know that if we can protect ourselves from the virus and stay healthy, that's great. But for the community, I think we need to market it as, you know, if you get a vaccination, you'll be able to go on a family vacation next summer. We'll all be able to go see baseball games and frame it in that format to really get folks on board. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Any other comments for the panelists? Daniel?
Again, great presentation by both presenters today. For the long term, when we look at COVID, there's so many things that we've learned about this disease, everything from droplet and aerosol dispersion. I've learned so much in regards to that. But again, how we approach our workforce, medical countermeasures, and what we do in the future. I think all organizations kind of need to take a step back and say, what were the things that we could have did better in regards to engaging with our workforce, and how are we going to improve those moving forward? And that's going to be key for many organizations across the United States. John, thanks again for having me on today. Everybody did a great job.
Thanks, Dan. Rick, comments?
Yeah, I think a lot about, listen to this presentation, the comments in the, by the panelists in the chat. And what we saw with the polling with, I think 11% that we're not going to get the vaccine. I think a lot about rounds that we did, critical care rounds we did with a rural intensivist, and we were focused on rural ICUs, and I thought we were going to talk about the issues around short-staffed and not enough ventilators and not enough PPE, and the subject that he wanted to talk about was the difficulty in trying to convince people that even the virus was real. That was what the entire focus of his presentation. And so we've got 11% on these rounds that have decided they're not going to get the vaccine. So, I mean, I think it's actually a really important question. I don't think I actually have an opinion on right now, but it's like really, really important for EMS medical directors to think about the energy that they either will decide to spend or not spend on those people who have decided not to get the vaccine or on their staff. Having faculty members in one of my previous roles who absolutely would not get the vaccine when they had drawn a line in the sand, what is the energy that you want to expend, need to expend on that versus all the other things you do? And I think it's something that you're going to have to grapple with head on. Over.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate that. And that's going to be a tough question to answer. Ken, any final thoughts that you have based on your experiences?
Yeah, I appreciate all the comments that everybody made. There were obviously a lot of bright folks on this. I think going forward, the key for us is to just continue to disseminate the facts as we know them. Obviously, this has been a very rapidly changing environment with a brand new virus. But vaccination and vaccination technology is not a brand new topic for us. We do have some newer methods. I think we just need to keep hammering home the science behind this. Leave the political noise with the politicians. And for us as scientists, medical directors, EMS practitioners, we just keep going out there, find the facts, the peer-reviewed stuff, and disseminate the information as best we can. And then, of course, let folks make their own decision once they have the facts.
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to play off the last two comments that just came in. One suggested that every EMS medical director should arrange a photo op while getting their vaccination from a paramedic. Dynamite idea. Got it. I will tell you that the Office of EMS is actually in the process of getting a number of EMS clinicians to video their vaccinations when they do get it. And that will be put together as part of a public outreach campaign. The second question, and this is potentially a little bit charged, but how many of the panelists are going to get a vaccine when it's available to them? Okay, we have a little bit of a consensus there. Thank you all very, very much. To Ken, phenomenal job. Matt, phenomenal job. Thank you. To the panelists, as always, great observations and great questions. Bruce and your team, thank you so much. The audience, Great chat and questions and answers. We really appreciate the dialogue that you all have initiated and participated in. Thank you all. We will see you next Monday, same time, same place, same link. Have a great week, folks.